Queer film history. What is it? Well, it's hard to define. Modern terms of sexuality were being developed around the same time as the technology that would become the film we know today. The public attitude towards queerness being the sexuality between or even beyond homo and heterosexuality, was directed by Puritan beliefs that sexuality outside of married procreation was a disease. Homosexuality was initially defined as a man who believed he was a woman and therefore was attracted to men, what would in today's standards be considered transgendered. Films rarely outright had queer characters, rather they would speak it through coded stereotypes. Queer men had longer hair that flounced when they moved, limp wrists, and a personality that's passive, damsel-esque, that's associated with femininity. Queer women were portrayed as mannish, with short hair and wearing pants, although that could be interchangeable with first-wave feminism. All of these points make it hard to determine what is and what isn't queer cinema in the late 19th and early 20th century. For example, take one of the first movies ever made by Thomas Edison himself. Here we see two men closely embracing in a dance. We don't know who these two men are or why they're dancing so closely. What's the relationship between these two individuals? Is this a stage performance where they are taking on characters, or is it akin to cinema verite? Is this happening simply due to a lack of women in the studio when they wanted to make this movie? Both men have short hair and are dressed in a traditionally masculine way, which did not fit the understanding of homosexuality at the time. The film was later called The Gay Brothers, but initially there was no title card to give context to the situation. So looking back on this movie, we cannot define it as heterosexual, as it depicts two men dancing in a way that's traditionally between men and women. But we cannot define it as homosexual, as there is no period-accurate indication of a femininity that would indicate either of them to be homosexual rather than homosocial, or a platonic relationship between two people of the same gender. As it is neither indicatively homosexual or heterosexual in nature, could one define this as queer? As film progresses as a medium and becomes more firmly a storytelling art form, queerness evolves with it. From the dawn of film, it was understood that uncomfortable subjects would be deemed more appropriate when portrayed in a comedic way. In 1914, the film A Florida Enchantment follows a young woman who eats magical seeds that makes her turn into a man. We see her shift from the passive, delicate behaviors associated with femininity to the aggressive, proud behaviors of a man. He/she goes on to act in an amorous manner when talking to women, kissing them and greeting, embracing them for just a hair too long, and directing them in a rather masculine way. As the film continues, they continue to eat seeds, changing back and forth between man and a woman, but still continuing to act in a masculine way even when they're meant to be a woman, such as kissing their lady friend Bessie as a woman. This was groundbreaking examples of queerness at the time. However, the film was produced, directed by, and starring the vaudeville comedic duo Mr. and Mrs. Sidney True. The seemingly heterosexual couple knew from their vaudeville days that sexual promiscuity sold, and knew that this theme would drive audiences to the theaters. Given that this is not written by queer people and is not necessarily made for queer people, could one consider this a queer film? Throughout the 20s, the culture shifted away from Puritan beliefs to a more liberal understanding of the individual. Corsets were tossed away, hemlines were shortened, and dancing became a much more vivacious and promiscuous act with the rise of jazz. Film followed suit, homosexual depictions of characters becoming more and more interwoven in storylines. Sexuality and danger sold tickets. Especially when the Great Depression hit, film pushed these controversial storylines in order to convince audiences to spend what few pennies they had on movie tickets. Greta Garbo famously wrangled MGM into producing Queen Christina, a biopic where a Swedish queen who rejects all romantic offers by men disguises herself as a man to spend time away from the capital. In this time, she kisses her lady-in-waiting, Eva, who in real life was thought to be a possible lover of Queen Christina.
Oh, you always say that. But at the end of the day, you're never free to go anywhere. You're surrounded by musty old papers and musty old men, and I can't get near you.
Today, I'll dispose of them by sundown, I promise you. and we'll go away for 2 or 3 days in the country.
Oh.
Wouldn't you like that?
Oh, I'd love it.
The French ambassador, Monsieur.
As she is dressed in men's clothing with her hair slicked back, she does fit the stereotype of a homosexual woman. Later, she meets a Spaniard at an inn who believes her to be a man, and later when she's undressing in their shared room, he curiously takes a peek, expecting to see a man, but he finds a woman instead. They sleep together, and the next morning, the Spaniard's attendant comes around to see them cuddling in bed. The scene comes across very homoerotic to the attendant, who fully believes they are both men. This casual show and flexibility of romance and gender is inherently queer, with Queen Christina comfortably acting as a man and a woman, and her partners not minding whatever she portrays as. The majority of the romance is understood to be heterosexual, and therefore more accepted by most box office critics, although the homosexual kiss did cause some uproars with censors. Greta Garbo was known to have multiple relationships with men and women, and therefore she was essentially a producer on this film. It was made by a queer person and likely made with some clear signals to queer audiences at the time. But do the queer-coded actions of a character make it a queer film when there is no real queer storyline besides a queen who dresses as a man in disguise? The possibilities of what a film like this could mean for queer representation was incinerated a year later when the Production Code of 1934 was established, also known as the Hays Code. This code outright forbid any nudity, interracial relationships, or any indication of sexuality outside of a married couple, definitively banning any queer relationship. Coded words such as pansy or lavender were picked up by studio censors and banned in pre-production. While this caused the emergence of new, more modern terms for homosexuality, for example, the term gay.
I've lost my clothes.
But why are you wearing these clothes?
Because I just went gay all of a sudden. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Now see here, young man, stop this nonsense. What are you doing?
Queer characters were written with absentee spouses and flamboyant personalities that were more easily laughed off than taken seriously, at risk of being struck by the code. More obvious queer actions were allowed to be played by villainous, monstrous characters who usually were shot down for their immorality at the end. This associated the queer identity with villainy, shame, and, at best, laughability. Some would say that until after the 1960s, there is no queer cinema as a result. The 1960s economic boom and powerful anti-establishment youth culture effectively smothered the Hays Code. The sexual revolution through fashion and growing accessibility of independent film and media took the reins of power from major studios. This leads me to the final film for queer consideration. Created just after the sexual revolution of the 1960s and just before the 1980s moral panic that essentially snuffed out any queer progress of the previous decade, is the 1975 film Dog Day Afternoon. Here we follow two men, Sonny and Sal, as they rob a bank. Sonny is shown to be a good Catholic man from a working class family with a wife and 2 kids who makes it clear that he doesn't want anyone to get hurt. The audience, both the movie viewers as well as the crowd that surrounds the bank for the entirety of the movie, identify with Sonny as he sticks it to the man time and time again by forcing the cops that surround the bank to put down their guns when he's unarmed.
Put those fucking guns down! Put those guns down! Put them down! Put them down! Put those fucking guns down! Put those guns down!
Or telling a talk show host who called into the bank for a story that, as a wealthy man, that he doesn't get to judge him for the decisions he makes to make money.
I got a wife and a couple of kids. How am I going to live on that? What do you make a week?
Well, I'm here to talk to you, Sonny.
No, well, I'm talking to you.
Sonny,
Yeah?
you could give up.
Give up? Right. You ever been to prison?
No.
No. Well, let's talk about something you fucking know about, okay? How much you make a week? That's what I want to hear.
Ladies and gentlemen,
You going to talk to me about
transmission
that?
has been temporarily interrupted.
As he speaks for the people, the audience identifies with Sonny. That is, until halfway through the movie, when it is revealed that Sonny has a second wife, a man named Leon. Leon wants a sex change operation as he recently had the revelation that he is, quote,
I was a woman trapped in a man's body.
Sonny promised to get money for their surgery, and that's what led us to the events of the movie. While Sonny never identified as queer, he does address Leon in his will.
Whom I love more than any man has loved another man in all eternity.
Followed by a message revowing his love for his first wife, the mother of his children. The crowd no longer sees him as this masculine man. All of his actions are now seen through the queer lens with this revelation. When he pats down an FBI agent to check for weapons before letting him into the bank, the crowd jeers with wolf whistles. Parade of Greenwich Village queer folk march into the crowd to show their support. But again, Sonny never identifies as queer and never intended to become a queer icon or martyr. This is all imposed by the spectators. This film is based off of a true story, a famous queer bank heist that happened just a few years prior. The director, Sidney Lumet, is known as a heterosexual man and stated that the theme of this film was to show that outcasts are no different than the rest of us, and that we can identify with anyone if we just take the time to understand them first. The question is this a queer film? This film is based off of a queer story and only exists because queerness exists. The characters are queer and express undeniable queer love to one another, as well as heterosexual love. However, the director is not queer and made it so that people could learn to understand that outcasts are people too, therefore not making it for a queer audience. With that in mind, what do you think? Personally, I believe that queer film is as fluid as queerness itself. I don't believe that homosocialism is inherently homoerotic or should be considered such. But I do believe that giving the impression of being queer has often been the queer way of safely expressing themselves to one another, and queer cinema has historically been the same. Whether it's been through prolonged physical contact, associations with the color pink or lavender, or through outright declaring homosexual love, queer film creates a dialogue between the viewer and the media. The media presents a possibility of gender and sexuality, which is left for the spectator to explore and break down the meaning of or the validity to. Queer cinema is that dialogue, and there is no singular definition that could encompass depictions of queer cinema, as there is no singular definition that can encompass the queer experience.
Let's have it.
May I crack in?
Why, certainly.
Boys will be boys.
Woo!